Hello, welcome back to Cracking the Cryptic. This is our second video of the day. I recorded a video on the Times crossword earlier. I have a bit of time today, so I'm going to try this puzzle as well. This has come in by email. John, thank you, John. Our email address, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is crackingthecryptic@gmail.com. So do email us if you have puzzles you'd like us to consider for the channel. We're also on Twitter at Cryptic Cracking. Now, John says that this puzzle is impossible. He got it from an app, which is the Brainium app, actually, which we've seen before. This was, I think, the most recent puzzle we've done from Brainium was a puzzle where we used Derek Neal's slot machine technique. So I'm not sure whether John has seen that video. Maybe that would help on this puzzle. If you want to have a go at the puzzle, do click on the link under the video. If you're not subscribers yet and you enjoy the video, please remember to subscribe. And any of you who could consider sponsoring us on Patreon is massively appreciated. It's just a couple of bucks a month, and you do get our own puzzle as a result of that. Now, let's have a look at this then. John says he couldn't enter one number, by the way. So let's hope I can do better than that. Now I'll start off with standard Snyder notation. Once I spot anything I can Snyder notate. Threes, okay. So this is meaning I'm going to put that the threes can only go in exactly these two positions. And with our software here, you have a choice of how you notate. And when I notate in the corners of cells, I'm going to call that Snyder notation after probably the greatest Sudoku solver of all time, Thomas Snyder, whose method this is. Fours can go in one of those squares. And one of these two squares up here. This isn't, I can't put anything in this grid. Every number is offset. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, if you look at the arrangement of some of these numbers across the grid, they're never occurring. Is there any instance where we have a repeated number in a shoot of 3? So if we look in this shoot of 3, we've got, they're all different numbers. 2, 3. Is this true throughout the puzzle? Is this true throughout the puzzle? So if we take the rows as groups of 3, there's no set of 3 rows that contains a repeated digit. Whoa, okay, this is going to be very hard. Okay, Right. Well, what do we do when we're faced with this? Well, I've got something. It's 4, 9 here. This 4, 9 and this 4, 9 interact on this block. And they force 4s and 9s into just 2 positions, just those 2. They're the only cells that can contain 4 and 9 in this bottom block. The problem is we've got nothing more in column 5 and nothing more in row 7, so I'm not sure how useful that is. This could be a long video. Okay, I'm clearly not making progress using Snyder notation here, so I'm going to have to think of something else to do. Good Lord, I feel like I'm being so dumb. Got got something else. 3s and 7s here. 3 and 7 here. 3 and 7 here. So I can put 7s into one of those two places. But I've got the same problem, look. I suppose I can pencil mark a 6 as well into these two blocks, but it's not in a useful way. It feels to me, I'm wondering now whether this is another of these puzzles that would lend itself to the slot machine technique, because the fact that there are no repeated digits in these when you consider rows and columns in sets of 3. I can see, for example, the 6s are offset here, I can see the 7s are offset, and I can see the 4s also. So there's 3 of each of those digits, none of which are interacting with each other directly. They're always interacting via another box, and that, or another 3 by 3 box. Now that tends to mean that we could find chains around the grid. So one of the things that I think Derek Neal said is that where this pattern emerges, it's very, very good for finding X cycles, which is what that is. Now the other thing he said, I remember, is that it's useful for finding swordfishes. So why don't we, rather than jumping to slot machine, why don't we try and find a swordfish? So some of you may not be familiar with the term swordfish, and I'll put a link, it should be something on the top right of the screen. I'll edit the video afterwards to show you a link to a good video on what a swordfish is. But I'm going to use colour to see if I can find one. Now I've got to pick a number to look at, so I'm going to pick 7s, just because I can see that the 7s are all offset. So let's see if we can find a swordfish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all of the cells in the grid that can contain 7s. I'll use green to do that, and then we'll see what we can see. So if we work our way across like this can be a 7, neither of those can be 7s. 7 in this square, 7 in those two squares again. Now this square and this square, obviously, these two squares. And this square. Okay, so there we go. Now, what we're looking for now is we need to stare at this pattern, and we should consider firstly rows and then columns, and we're trying to spot whether or not we can spot an overlap between the patterns. And we need that overlap to occur. If we're looking at rows, we need it to occur in 3 columns only. So let's just take a quick stab at this and see if I can spot anything. And no, I'm not seeing. Now, okay, I haven't spotted anything in the rows, but I have spotted something in the columns. Unfortunately, it's more complicated than I was hoping for, but I will show you what I'm talking about. Oh, I'm going to highlight some cells in a different colour. And we'll talk about it. Now, I'm going to highlight those cells to start with. I want you to ignore this cell. So I want us to just stare at the purple cells here and note that in the respective columns, they're the only possibilities of where 7s can go. Okay, so I want us now to think about how the 7s could be disposed around this grid. How would we locate the 7s? And hopefully it's not too difficult to see that there must always be, in fact let's do it, let's have a look. So if this was a 7, you can see that because that would have to be a 7, and this would have to be a 7. So that's absolutely forced once we start with this being a 7 here. Now if on the other hand, we go the other way, and we say this is a 7, we get that pattern. Now either way, the massively important thing to realise with the swordfish is that in row 3, row 5 and row 7, the 7s can only appear in the purple squares. Okay, so however we scattered those 7s around the grid, there was either one here, and one here, or one here, and one here. So the 7s in the rows could only go in these positions. But remember, that derived from the fact that we locked the 7s into exactly 2 positions in 3 different columns. So this is the swordfish pattern. We're looking for 3 different rows or columns where the numbers can only go into 3 positions. And here it's a subset of the three column, well, or it's a subset, it's 3 columns, but in each of these columns you can see that the 7 can actually only go in 2 positions rather than 3 to completely finish the swordfish, or show, you know, where the pattern would still work if the 7s could be here, here, and here. And you can see now, if I just step away, I've got this sort of block arrangement of 7s. Now, if this was the pattern, so remember I removed this 7 from the possibility, what we'd be able to say with certainty is that this square here can't be a 7. And that might be useful ordinarily. Unfortunately, in this instance, it's not that helpful because, well, it just doesn't seem to be. This cell couldn't be a 7 either, because we would be able to, we know for a fact one of the purple squares is where the 7 is in row 3. We know for a fact that one of the purple squares is where the 7 is in row 5, so we can delete this possibility for a 7, ditto this one here. Now, unfortunately, you will remember, if you were concentrating, that actually this was the pattern that we had. Now, this is still a kind of swordfish. This is called a finned swordfish, and it allows us to do a little bit of logic, but it's a bit less powerful. And the way to approach this logic is to say we either have a swordfish, in which case we definitely know this square cannot be a 7, or if we don't have a swordfish, this square must be a 7. And if this square is a 7, I can still remove the 7 from this square. So in this particular pattern, we're able to eliminate a 7 from this square, and that's the only square we can eliminate the 7 from. So it's not particularly great in this example, but I wanted to show you, let me just double check that removing a 7 from this square doesn't somehow blow the puzzle open. I don't see how it does. This square can be lots of different things. So what does all that mean? Well, it means, by the way, we've managed to make some improvements to the software, so I can now highlight lots of squares like that just by pressing the shift key, or even just using the cursor and holding it down. It's made this solving tool even better than it was before. So 7s were not the answer, but that is what the swordfish was, and that is what the slot machine is getting towards. It's getting towards the fact that particular numbers are very restricted in terms of rows and columns. Now, let's look at 4s now, because again, they're coming straight across the grid. There's only 3 4s in the grid, and they're on the other diagonal to the 7s. So we'll just check whether or not we can work some magic with 4s instead. So 4s can go in this square and this square. Square and this square. Obviously, I'd actually pencil mark those in that block. Same thing there. Those squares, these squares, and 3 squares at the bottom. Okay, so now let's see if we can spot the swordfish. So again, what we're looking for, okay. Alright, now there is, it's another complicated one, but there is one. Let me show you. So, those 2, these 2, and these 2 would be the base of the swordfish. You can see here, I've limited the 4s to exactly 2 positions in row 1, exactly 2 positions in row 6, and almost exactly 2 positions in row 9. And you can see that these columns in which these restrictions are applying are the same columns. So column 2, column 4, and column 7. Now, the outlier this time is this square. Now, this square can also be a 7. But we can do our logic again. So either the swordfish is true. Now, if the swordfish is true, I'm able to eliminate from the columns any other instance of the 4, because I know that the only places in these columns that can take a 4 are in the purple squares. So that would allow me to eliminate a 4 from this square. But if the swordfish is not true, this square here must be a 4. So either way, this square is not a 4. And that is important this time, because this square not being a 4, let's look at row 8 now. Where can a 4 go in row 8? Only in this square. This is the only position that a 4 can go into. And all of a sudden, we're able to start to make progress, because that 4 gives us a 9 here, and it also is going to allow us to work out some stuff using the 4s up here. Now, what I'm going to do at the end of this video, depending on how long this solve takes, is I'm going to come back to this position. It won't take long because it's just resetting the puzzle, and I'm going to check whether or not the slot machine would have worked on the 4s, because my suspicion is that it would have done. And you know, it's yet another example of how powerful Derek Neal's technique is. And it's fascinating actually that this is an expert puzzle from the Brainium app, and I wonder how many people out there are just you know, really struggling. If you can't enter a single number on a Sudoku, it is mind-bogglingly well, I was finding it, as you saw at the start of this video. It's so depressing when you're looking at it, go, I just can't make progress. But with this technique, even this very difficult puzzle might be doable. Now let's see. So yeah, you can see this is going to immediately give me a 4 here and a 4. Oh, hang on, what's going on? Oh, I've got the wrong pencil marks. So I've got a 4 there. Now this is a 4. And 4, 4. Well, we didn't do badly. We did quite well. We got the 4s down. 3 more 4s in the grid. So that's certainly an improvement over where we were a few seconds ago. And 9s now look like they might actually. Yeah, 9s are also going around the grid. This is it's beautiful, isn't it? Isn't it? I don't know if you're getting the same pleasure I am out of seeing the way that just unlocking these 4s has allowed us to, you know, you can see the 9s are now chaining. And now I think I've done all of the 9s. It's absolutely beautiful. Right, anyway, let's come back to seeing if we can solve this. 1, 2, 5, 6. There's a hidden or naked single here. If we look down column 5, we need 1, 2, 5, and 6. 2, 5, 6 in row 2, so that must be a 1. Let's pencil mark some 1s at the bottom. So now where can we put a 5 in column 6? Only in this square. That gives us a 5, 4 double in row 9 there. I'm still looking to place 2 and 6 into the rest of column 6. So we can highlight that at least. 2, 6, 3, 7, 8. So this square is a 3 or a 7. This square is a 3 or an 8. One, 5, 6, and 8. 6, 5, maybe I should go back to actually look. That's a 5 there because of this 5 and this 5. Let's put that in. This must be a 5 therefore. 5's into one of those two squares. 1, 6 and 8 into the open positions in row 6. So that must be an 8 because there's already a 1 and a 6 in the column. This must be a 6 now because of this 6 and this is a 1. Okay, now let's try and make sure that we use the information we've just gathered. So this 6, so we got 6 down here. I think wasn't 6 another number that I noticed was disposed quite interestingly around the grid? Yeah, you can see the 6s are chaining as well. So now this is a 2 and this is a 6. 6, 6, this must be a 6. Must be 3, 7. 1 and 2 into these two squares, this 1. This is amazing. This puzzle was so hard. And yet once we made that little bit of progress, all of a sudden it's becoming extremely doable. 3, 7. So 2 and 3 into these two squares. Sorry, there's a 2 there. See, that is something that would not happen, I like to think anyway, if I was solving on paper. Somehow you get these blind spots when you're staring at the screen. So this must be a 7, that's a 7, that's a 3. This is a 7, hopefully. That means this is an 8. 1, 3, 5 and 8 up here. Eight, 1, 1, 1. All going around the grid here. This should be 3 and 8. Can't see which way round that is yet. And this should be, what's that going to be? 4 and 7 again. I suppose I'll put those in like this. 4, 7. So 3 there. I should have sorted that as well. 3 and 5. Threes into these two positions. This should be a 7, and you can see that's going to open up the whole of this side of the grid because we get the 4 there, which means we get the 5 here. Now this should be a 5, 3, 8 pair, so this should be a 2. That looks good. 2, 3 and 8 down here. This square must be an 8. 8 here, and finally a 2. Yeah, and that looks like it's working. Let's just check. Yeah, so that is good. Now I'm just going to pause the video for a moment. Okay, now so what I've done is I've restarted the puzzle, and looking at the 4s, which is where I found the useful swordfish, I've done Derek Neal's highlighting. So in each box, rather than using colours, I've just highlighted where the 4s can go. Now remember that what Derek was recommending we do is to choose numbers where, you know, there was no interaction in chutes or rows, and that's exactly what the 4s do here, because the only 4s in the grid don't see each other directly, and there are 3 of them. And in terms of the pencil mark notations, we have no cell or no 3x3 block that can contain 4 4s. The maximum is 3, so this is perfect for what Derek tells us the slot machine can deliver. Now if we look at this square, let's imagine this square was the 4 in this 3x3 block, and see what happens. If this is a 4, that's going to be 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 a 4, and bang! Immediately the slot machine pays out. So now this, I suspect, I'm just going to, actually I can use a solver to see if we can find some more information out. 1 second. Okay, so I've put the puzzle into a solver. Now let's see what it finds. So, okay, so it finds nothing, which is what you'd expect. Then it finds the pairs. I think I found those. Whoa, Now it finds something. I don't know what that is. It's coloured some numbers to find something. Let's turn that one off. I don't know what that's doing. Ah, now this is the interesting thing. Okay, here you go. X cycle. So this is exactly what Derek said the slot machine might find. And yeah, and it's found something very similar to what we've just found by looking at the slot machine. We found that this square could not be a 4. Now the computer has found that this square must be a 4, because I think it's saying it has to remove the 2 and the 3. And it's done that by chaining the 4s. And you can see how difficult that is to see in amongst this sort of myriad of numbers if you fully pencil mark notate the grid. So yeah, so this is fascinating. So let me go back. Let's just turn that off and see what it finds. Okay, it finds some other thing. I don't know what that is. Let's turn that off. More things. That's in the group text cycle. Okay. Ah, now that is what I found. Here we go. So this is fascinating. So there is a similarity, it seems, between the Swordfish and the X cycle. And it's not that surprising, I guess, because they're both working off sort of multi-row, multi-column restriction. And the fin Swordfish obviously is working to give you this square down here, whereas the X cycle gives you this square, but it's exactly the same number that seems to be important. This is working off 4s, the X cycle is working off 4s. So something quite interesting today. I hope that you found that interesting anyway. A very difficult puzzle. I'm so sorry actually for those of you who try the puzzle without looking at the video first. I don't know how you'll have found it, but I can imagine there's going to be some hours wasted on this puzzle today because it is a very, very difficult puzzle. But having said that, a very beautiful puzzle as well, because we saw that as soon as we were able to make progress, the beautiful interaction of the numbers led to a very smooth solve thereafter. So the Brainium app that gets a thumbs up from me. I'll put a link to it in the description for those of you interested in these harder puzzles. And we'll be back soon with another edition of Cracking the Cryptic.